the one they run from, and the one they can't. You've probably felt it before. The cold confusion of someone pulling away. Just as you got closer, they said they liked you. They looked at you like you mattered. And then, silence, distance, a shift in their eyes. You start to wonder, was it something I said? Was I too much? Too available? But the truth is deeper than that. Because if you were dealing with someone avoidantly attached, what scared them wasn't your intensity. It was your authenticity. They don't run because you were too close. They run because you reached a part of them that doesn't know what to do with real closeness. And in their world, there are two kinds of people: the ones they can keep at arm's length, and the rare one who disarms their defenses, the one they stop running from. So what makes the difference? Why do avoidants treat some people like a revolving door, but stay grounded, present, even vulnerable with someone else? It's not about how you look. It's not about playing hard to get. And it's not about fixing them. It's about something far more primal, far more psychological. It's about the safety their nervous system feels or doesn't. Because avoidants don't fall for the person who chases them. They fall for the one who makes it safe to stay. Let's go deeper. When you're just an option to an avoidant person, they stay emotionally elusive. They breadcrumb you. They mirror you. They give you just enough to keep your hope alive, but never enough to feel secure. You're left second-guessing every interaction because they're present, then absent, charming, then withdrawn, engaged, then gone. This isn't accidental. This is emotional self-protection in action. They like you, but only as long as you don't disrupt their illusion of control. But when you're the one, something in them starts to break pattern. Something ancient and quiet begins to whisper, maybe I don't have to run anymore. They may not say it. They may not even fully understand it. But their behavior tells you. The push-pull softens. The testing stops. The distance begins to close. Because the fear that love will trap them is slowly replaced by a new idea. Maybe love can feel safe, but it's not instantaneous. Even when you're the one they feel most drawn to, the journey from avoidance to connection is layered with internal war. Because for the avoidant, real closeness activates every alarm system inside them. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because love, to them, has always been a battlefield. They learned early on that intimacy came with a cost, that needing someone meant vulnerability, and that vulnerability meant pain, loss, or engulfment. So their default response is withdrawal, control, silence, a carefully curated version of themselves that looks close, but keeps their core untouched until someone comes along and doesn't try to force their way in. Someone who doesn't chase them, but still sees them, not with pressure, but with presence, not with fear, but with grounded empathy. That's when the shift begins, and you'll know you're the one, not because they say it out loud, but because the walls don't go up as quickly. They start sharing without prompting. They check in without being asked. They allow space for emotional honesty, even if they're still learning how to sit in it. They stop running, not because their fear disappeared, but because your presence doesn't trigger their shame. But this doesn't mean you become their savior, or that your love alone can heal them. It means that you've stopped playing a role in the same old pattern. You've stopped being someone they can avoid themselves through, and started being someone who reflects who they could become if they stayed. Not idealized, not perfect, not forever certain, but real and safe. And in a world where avoidants have only ever trusted distance, that kind of presence can be world-changing. The nervous system doesn't lie. Why they can't fake it with you? When you're just an option, the avoidance nervous system stays in control. They operate from a distance, texting just enough to keep you invested, but never staying long enough for you to feel certain. They're warm when it's safe, cold when it's real, and you'll feel it in your gut, in the pauses between messages, in the way they dodge emotional depth with a well-timed joke or a sudden change of subject. They're present, but not available, close, but not reachable. This is how they survive connection, by keeping it on their terms, by controlling proximity, by making sure no one ever gets close enough to hurt them. Because somewhere deep in their wiring, they've learned that real intimacy isn't nourishing. It's dangerous. But when you're the one, when something in you feels different to them, they can't hide behind their old strategies. Because the nervous system doesn't lie, and yours speaks to theirs. It doesn't demand closeness. It invites it. It doesn't cling. It holds. Firmly, quietly, unapologetically. You become the first person who doesn't try to get something from them, but simply sees them. And they don't know why at first. They may even try to resist it. But something softens. They respond to your voice differently. They start showing up more consistently, even if the steps are small. Not because they've suddenly become secure, but because something about your presence doesn't trigger their panic. You don't invade. You don't interrogate. You don't collapse into them. You stay with your own self, your own center. And that, paradoxically, makes them want to move closer. Avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of losing themselves in it, of being engulfed, of giving and being devoured. So the moment someone comes along who doesn't need them to collapse or perform, someone who doesn't chase, but also doesn't pull away, their body starts to register something it's never felt before. Regulated connection, safe closeness, love without possession. That's when the inner battle begins to quiet. Because their nervous system finally gets the message. I can be close and still be me. You'll see it in the micro moments. The small, almost imperceptible ways they stop self-protecting. They won't always know how to say it, but they'll stay in the conversation longer. They'll pause before they pull away. They'll let silence exist between you without rushing to fill it with space. They'll listen instead of deflect. They'll share memories they've never told anyone. Not because you pushed, but because your presence made it safe enough to let something out. They begin to take emotional risks. Not grand declarations, but simple truths. I've never told anyone that before. I was scared you'd leave. I didn't know if you'd still want me after I said that. And when you hear those words, know that something monumental is happening, not just between you, but inside them. They're starting to experience a different kind of intimacy, one that doesn't cost them their freedom, one that doesn't mirror the chaos of their past. They're not being dragged into connection. They're choosing it. And for someone with avoidant attachment, that choice is sacred. They're learning, slowly, that love doesn't have to come with pressure. That vulnerability doesn't mean danger. That being seen doesn't equal being controlled. And that maybe, just maybe, the safest place they've ever known is right here, with you, and more importantly, within themselves. What they show you when they finally feel safe. When an avoidant begins to feel safe, you won't just hear it in their words. You'll feel it in their patterns. The way they respond to your texts doesn't feel like obligation anymore. It feels like wanting. They initiate conversations. They circle back when they sense you pulling away. Not because they're suddenly clingy, but because their fear of closeness is starting to be replaced by a deeper fear, losing something real. And here's the thing. Avoidants have spent most of their lives trying to prevent that very feeling. So they keep people at a distance, believing that detachment will protect them. But when you're the one, when you offer presence without pressure, their defenses begin to soften. Not out of guilt, not out of need, but because safety has finally become more powerful than fear. They don't run when things get quiet. They don't withdraw the moment conflict arises. Instead, they stay, even when it's uncomfortable, even when their old instinct tells them to disappear. They stay, not because it's easy, but because you feel worth the discomfort, worth the rewiring. And they start to do something rare. They let you in on their interior world. You'll notice them becoming more transparent, not because they've suddenly become emotionally fluent, but because trust is growing. They tell you what they're thinking before disappearing. They share their doubts without blaming. They start using we instead of I. Those may seem like small details, but for someone used to surviving love alone, those words are everything. They don't see you as a threat to their identity anymore. They start seeing you as a mirror that reflects who they could be. Connected, open, and still whole. There's a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes seismic, when the avoidant realizes they want to be close, not just physically, but emotionally. They no longer avoid eye contact during hard conversations. They stop dodging emotional intimacy with logic or sarcasm. They may still freeze, but they're quicker to unfreeze. They may still retreat, but now they come back because the door to safety has been cracked open, and they're learning how to walk through it. You may notice them saying things like, "I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying," or "I've never felt this safe with someone before." And those aren't lines. They're confessions, because avoidants don't perform vulnerability. They ration it, and when they give it to you, you'll know it's real. They're not trying to impress you. They're not trying to win you. They're simply trying to meet you as they are. Imperfect, uncertain, but present. That's when you'll know. You're not an option. You're not a placeholder. You're not someone they're keeping around until it's convenient. You're the one they're showing up for, even while they're still learning how. And it doesn't always look like flowers or big romantic gestures. Sometimes it looks like them texting back after a hard day, because they want to let you in. Sometimes it looks like them sitting beside you in silence, fighting the urge to run, choosing presence over protection. Sometimes it looks like messy honesty. "I got scared. I didn't know how to respond. I almost shut down, but I didn't want to lose this." That's love in the avoidance language. Not loud, not showy, but deep, earned, alive. Why it was never about you being too much. If you've ever loved someone avoidant, you probably spent far too much time wondering if you were too much, too emotional, too available, too expressive, too needy. But let this be a moment of truth. It was never that you were too much. It's that what you brought, openness, honesty, presence, touched a part of them they weren't ready to face. You weren't overwhelming. You were disarming. And for someone who has spent years building emotional armor, that can feel terrifying. Because here's the core wound of the avoidant. If someone really sees me, they'll leave. Or worse, they'll try to control me, engulf me, or abandon me the moment I need them. So when you come in with steady presence, clear feelings, open arms, they don't register love. At first, they register risk. Because deep connection doesn't just awaken desire. It awakens grief. It triggers every buried memory of being unseen, unheard, unprotected. And so they run, not from you, from the meaning of you, from the emotional exposure you represent. And here's what hurts. They don't tell you this. They just shift. They become distant. They pick fights. They say they need space. And because they don't explain the fear behind the wall, you fill the silence with self-blame. I must have been too intense. Maybe I moved too fast. If I just gave them more space, they'd come back. But what's really happening is that their nervous system is fighting a war between two forces. They're longing for closeness, and their fear of it. You didn't cause that war. You just illuminated it. The greatest tragedy of loving someone avoidant is how often you mistake their withdrawal as a reflection of your worth. You start editing yourself. You shrink your needs. You become hyper-aware of their emotional state, checking their tone, rereading texts, analyzing silences. Not because you're insecure, but because your intuition knows something's off. And yet, you keep trying to be enough, to say the right thing, to not scare them away. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were simply asking for a connection they didn't yet feel safe enough to receive. The pain you felt wasn't because you loved wrong. It's because you loved someone who hadn't yet made peace with being loved fully. And that's not your fault. That's not your burden. That's not your responsibility to fix. You may have believed that if you just loved them right, they'd stay. That if you proved you were safe, they'd soften. And sometimes they do. Sometimes love really does reach the avoidant. Sometimes it does help them feel safe enough to stay, to open, to begin again. But it only happens when they choose to meet you there, when they do their own work, when they begin to unravel the inner belief that closeness is danger and connection is loss. And if they don't, then your tenderness is wasted on someone still loyal to their distance. So here's the real transformation. When you stop making their avoidance mean something about you, when you stop seeing your openness as a flaw to be toned down, when you stop thinking that needing connection is a weakness instead of what makes you human, because the moment you realize that, you stop trying to prove your worth to someone afraid of receiving it. You stop chasing breadcrumbs and start choosing connection that feels mutual. You stop twisting yourself into something palatable for someone who doesn't know how to digest depth. And maybe that's when the right avoidant finally stays. Not because you chased, but because you stood still, grounded, whole, refusing to shrink. That energy isn't overwhelming. It's magnetic, because you become the one who doesn't make their fear yours, the one who sees their walls, but doesn't internalize them, the one who loves clearly, but no longer begs to be received. And that's when they know you're not here to complete them. You're not here to fix them. You're here to meet them, only if they meet you too. When love stops being a threat, what they do instead. When an avoidant finally begins to heal, love stops feeling like a trap. It stops feeling like something that demands escape. And instead, it becomes something they want to return to. And they do return. But this time, differently. Not in loops. Not with hot and cold confusion. Not with apologies that lead nowhere. They return with awareness. With small consistencies that say, I'm trying. I see you. You matter, even when I disappear into myself. Because healing isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And for the avoidant, presence is the hardest gift to give. Because it means staying with another without abandoning themselves. They start doing things that once felt foreign, answering vulnerability with stillness instead of defensiveness, allowing hard conversations to unfold without retreat, choosing to repair instead of self-protect. They learn to listen, not to solve or escape, but to understand. They begin to say things they once couldn't. I felt scared when you got close, and I pulled away. I need time sometimes, but I don't want distance to become disconnection. I want to be close, even if it's hard for me. And in those moments, you don't feel like you're begging for scraps. You feel like you're finally speaking the same language. Because the avoidant who's begun to heal starts translating fear into truth. They name their inner storms. They no longer make you feel like the storm. But here's the quiet reality. Most avoidants don't get there by accident. They don't just stumble into secure love. They choose it. They wrestle with it. They stay with themselves long enough to understand why they push others away. They choose the discomfort of showing up over the safety of disappearing. They start recognizing that real connection doesn't cost freedom. It creates it. Because now, they're not just trying to protect their heart, they're learning how to share it. And if you're someone who has ever waited, hoped, or tried to prove yourself worthy of the avoidance love, this is what I want you to remember. You are not a fixer. You are not a test. You are not responsible for unlocking someone else's capacity for closeness. You are a mirror, one that reflects both love and reality. And sometimes, your presence will be the very thing that brings someone avoidant face to face with the part of themselves that longs to be loved, but fears being seen. If they're ready, they'll rise. If they're not, they'll run. But neither response is your fault. In the end, you'll know you were the one, not because they said all the right things, but because they stopped hiding behind distance, because they chose to stay in the room, because they stopped punishing you for wanting connection, because they learned to breathe through their panic, instead of blaming you for triggering it. And when that happens, you won't feel like you're chasing anymore. You'll feel chosen, not because you forced it, but because they finally let themselves choose too. And if that's not what you have right now, it doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means they're not ready. And readiness isn't something you can inspire. It's something they must claim. So love bravely, but don't abandon yourself just to keep someone who hasn't yet learned how to stay. Because when an avoidant stops running, you won't need to ask. You'll feel it in the steadiness of their presence, in the peace of your nervous system, in the quiet knowing that finally, you're not chasing love. You're standing in it.